Welcome, everyone. This is the fifth installment of The Future with FullCycle. Even though we're a growth equity fund and our job is to accelerate the deployment of climate critical technologies, we thought to take advantage of this downtime, an opportunity to educate investors on the role that private capital can play in changing our current warming trajectory. And that's why we launched this series. We've been very fortunate to have extraordinary guests. And today we're so lucky to have the former President of Ireland, Mrs. Mary Robinson, with us today. All of us have heard of former President Robinson and have been sending me a lot of emails, delighted that we get a chance to hear from her. Following her presidency, she acted as UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. She was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom from President Barack Obama and served as the UN Secretary General's Special Envoy on Climate Change. Mrs. Robinson brings a unique perspective on climate justice and multilateral climate leadership, and that's especially required during this juncture in history. So we're incredibly grateful to have you with us, and thank you so much for taking the time. That's very generous of you to join us today, former President.
I'm delighted to be with you.
I understand that you have some remarks you'd like to start with, and we're all eager to hear them. So please jump in whenever you're ready.
Well, you asked me if I would speak about climate justice, because people speak about climate change, but when you use the term climate justice, they say, what exactly is that? And it's interesting, it's what the children speak about when they come out to march for their Fridays for Future. What young people, when they're looking for change, they march for climate justice. I've been working for the last 20 years now, I think, on climate justice. And I've discovered that there are probably about 5 layers. And I will go through them quite quickly. The first layer was the one that I started with because I didn't talk about climate change when I was President of Ireland for 7 years. I didn't really talk about climate change when I was High Commissioner for Human Rights in the UN from 1997 to 2002, because there was another part of the UN dealing with it. And I was in a silo, if you like. So it was after that, working in African countries on the rights that really matter if you don't have them, rights to health and education and women, peace and security issues, that I kept hearing, things are so much worse. And I realized something that I'd completely missed, that climate was undermining a whole range of human rights and doing it in a very unjust way, doing it in the poorest countries and poorest communities who were least responsible. They weren't driving cars, manufacturing, having central heating. They were just buffeted by something they didn't understand. A number of women said to me, is God punishing us? Didn't understand. So that was my first opening to climate justice. And my second one is linked to that. It was the gender dimensions within that. That women have less power, they don't have land rights, and yet they have to put food on the table. They have to go further for the water when there's drought, further for the firewood, etc. So huge gender dimensions to the climate issue. The third issue is the one the children have been talking about, and very acutely and very successfully, I think, the intergenerational dimension. That we have responsibility for doing it, but we are not providing them with a safe future. And they know it. And they're quite angry about it. And I understand the anger because, we should be taking that responsibility. And they're asking us, listen to the science. Don't listen to us. Listen to the science. And please, please pay attention and do what needs to be done. The fourth level is a subtle one, but I think it's a really important one. It's the injustice of the different pathways to development. The pathway to development of the industrialized world, the United States, Ireland, Europe, Korea, Japan, etc., was based on fossil fuel. And we must honor the workers in fossil fuel because they helped to build our economies. But now we have to wean ourselves off fossil fuel. And that's one problem. For developing countries, before Paris, I was the special envoy of the UN Secretary General in the lead up to the Paris Climate Agreement. And I observed that developing countries in their nationally determined contributions were the promises that were made before Paris. One after the other, most of them committed to being as green as possible But they said, of course, we will need the technology, we'll need the investment, we'll need the know-how, we need the skills, but we want to go there. Meanwhile, they didn't really get that, not to the extent that they needed. And they have found oil and gas, but also coal. They probably knew about the coal, and now they've found new oil and gas fields. What are they to do? That's a dilemma. And it's a difficult dilemma because they have to bring their people out of poverty. But if they go that route, then they close the gap for all of us as to whether we can get to 1.5 degrees and stay there, which is what the scientists have told us. The fifth layer of injustice is the one that I came to later, but now feel is so important. And that's the injustice to nature, to the ecosystems that sustain us, to the biodiversity. The report in May last year of the possible extinction of 1 million species. So we have these 5 layers of injustice, and probably other people could even find other layers, but let's stop there. And it's very people-centered, but also nature-based now. And I look for the solutions there.
Thank you. Thank you for presenting us to all the knock-on effects of this crisis and how it affects the most disenfranchised and the poorest amongst us, and the ones on the front lines are the ones that have least contributed to this problem in the first place. It weighs on my heart as well. And thank you for the work that you've done to bring attention to that and help those people who are suffering.
What I might do, if you allow me, in a few minutes, is maybe also share, because I often do this, the lessons I think we can learn from the COVID crisis. Because in January, I was very depressed that we had this climate crisis. We had the COP, the Conference on Climate was to take place in Scotland, in Glasgow, in November. It's now been postponed, of course. And I couldn't see the ambition that was needed. And then COVID hit. And it has been very negative. It has been a terrible health crisis, an economic crisis, a political crisis, a social stability crisis, everything. But it also has taught us lessons. And I think there are 4 lessons that I think will help us as we come out to also deal with the other looming crisis, which hasn't gone away, the climate crisis. And those 4 lessons are, first of all, that human behavior collectively can matter, because it's our collective compliance with lockdown, compliance with social distancing, compliance with washing our hands, etc., that is the only protection at the moment, because we don't have a vaccine. So we're helping, and countries that are doing this well are doing a better job, where the people are complying better, probably because they've got good leadership. And that brings me to the second point, that governments matter, including at state level. And you know, I'm very happy as a woman to be able to say that women-led governments have done remarkably well, from Angela Merkel in Germany to the prime ministers of Norway, Denmark, Finland, Iceland in Europe, to Jacinda Ardern, whom I know in New Zealand, to the president of Taiwan, close to China. All of these have taken tough decisions, brought their people with them, etc. So government matters. Collective behavior can be powerful. Government matters. Science matters. So, so important in this age of misinformation and denial of science. We will see a very raw analysis of those leaders who led badly and didn't listen to the science. It's already happening, but it will happen conclusively. You know, in a year or two, the jury will be unequivocal on that. And then another one, and sometimes people don't mention this, but I'd like to, compassion matters. When I talked initially about climate justice, and particularly referred to the poorest countries, the small island states, the indigenous peoples who were so affected, as I saw, by climate change, people would look at me and say, but that's not me. You know, there was a kind of a lack of empathy. Now I think people are more open. We're more open because we're all having to change our lifestyle. So we're more open to the pain and suffering of others. I see it in neighborliness in the United States. In every state, you can see people coming out to help those who need the food parcels, who need the this, who need the that, who need to be remembered. The health workers, the care workers, you name it. And it's happening all over the world. So I hope that that is a beginnings of the kind of solidarity that we need far more. I'll stop there now. I've said all I need to say.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for reminding us that we're all in this together.
Absolutely.
And this is, you know, one person in somewhere in the world can, you know, apparently China contracted a virus and the whole world is sheltering in place. We are all in this together. We're in a closed sphere in the middle of space. And there's no, you know, it's an illusion that, you know, the butterfly effect is not in full effect all the time. And we need to think that way. So compassion, interconnectivity is critical. So thank you for that reminder. If you don't mind, I'll share, so you reminded me a little bit about why I got into this space in the first place. Would that be appropriate?
Yes, absolutely.
Host nation in the Middle East. And I felt firsthand what it's like to be part of the disenfranchised in the world. So I look at the world through that lens personally. So when I studied the climate science and the chemical balance of the planet, it all came to me after being a scuba diver and seeing the degradation of the quality of the marine life under the ocean. And I thought to myself, what's the point of continuing to accumulate wealth on a planet that's dying? And that was not okay for me, because I knew, as you just said, that the people and the animals have contributed the least to the problem are the ones that are going to suffer the most from it. And I got into this line of work because I wanted to put myself, just to nominate myself as a voice for the voiceless as well. And this is kind of the genesis of my journey on this path since 2003. Which brings me to my first question, which I wanted to ask, if you don't mind. Most people don't realize that in the last, before COVID hit, 50% of the planet for the first time in history was middle class. And because of COVID, there's going to be projected to be 500 million people who will fall back into poverty because of this. And another thing that people don't realize is, when they think of climate change, they think of polar bears and melting ice caps. And what most people don't realize is, before that happens, we're going to have a massive climate migration problem that creates geopolitical instabilities in areas, in ways that we haven't even thought about. As you recall, there was 3 million refugees after the Syrian civil war and the Iraq civil war that moved into the EU, and that almost collapsed the entire European Union. So can you speak to the magnitude and severity of a warming planet, of what a warming planet creates geopolitically, when an entire latitude of people become climate refugees? The estimate is something between 90 million and 170 million people. What does the world look like if that happens?
Yeah, it's something that I've been very conscious of, and I think we think along similar lines from what you've said and from your own background. I actually criticized, when I went to my first climate conference in Copenhagen, the emphasis on technology and science at that time, and a very male environment. And I said, we shouldn't have the image of climate change being the polar bear on a melting ice floe. I have nothing against polar bears, but just, it should be a woman desperate because she can't get enough food or water. You know, a very different image. And that's the image that is in my mind when I think about the number who could be forced to leave their homes because of climate. I have a friend at the moment, Ursula Rukova. She is helping to move a population from a Catterick island to Papua New Guinea, to Bougainville in Papua New Guinea. It's not a change of sovereignty. The island is part, but it's far away. So she brings small numbers to Bougainville in Papua New Guinea to get to know their neighbors. They bought the land to get to and you know, all that. And then she says, so sadly, you can see it in her eyes, she says, but there's nothing I can do about the fact that we have to leave the land of the bones of our ancestors. And for an indigenous people, that's really hard. Now, there are so many small island states in the Pacific that will go under if we go above 2 degrees. Some of them will go under even at above 1.5 degrees. That's the start. But there are also populations where it will get too hot or it'll get too flooded, and it's already happening. They were already seeing very significant climate displacement. We can't call them, we call them climate displaced people. They're not strictly speaking refugees because they don't strictly speaking have refugee status. And they don't really have protection. They are slightly protected by a framework on migration that was evolved by the UN, but it hasn't given much protection. And as you say, if they have to move, it would destabilize other countries like European countries, those coming from Africa. And it means that COVID-19 is now becoming part of a big debt problem in Africa. Unfortunately, remittances were a big value to developing countries. Money sent home by those employed in the richer parts of the world, like Los Angeles, like sending it to Latin America, like in Europe, sending it to Africa. That's dried up because of the layoffs of people, so they can't send back the remittances. And meanwhile, the problems, including the food problems, become worse. So we're in a very real crisis at the moment, which could lead to quite big migrations if we don't tackle it intelligently and provide a kind of COVID recovery package that is more tuned to, we're in this together, and it's more global.
Yeah, because we have an audience of primarily investors and asset managers, I bring up the question, I brought up this question because it's, it's now more important than ever to understand that health, climate, economy, in fact, civilization is all based on a stable biosphere. In fact, the human beings were able to build a civilization because we've had 12,000 years of a stable climate called the Holocene age, that now that we're entering the Anthropocene age, we are destabilizing. So ironically, the investor mind frame of siloing all these issues together is now coming to haunt us, because there is no economy in a destabilized climate in the first place. So that's what's so interesting. So, you've spoken so many times about the need for private sector leadership. Do you have any thoughts about what private capital can do in combating the crisis, all these crises that we're facing? Because the audience we have today is eager to hear how they can help, and we'd love your thoughts on the matter.
No, that's a very interesting question. I mean, how I would frame the issue that you raised there is that actually what we call business as usual was not leading us to a safe world for our children and grandchildren. First of all, it was too unequal as a world, genuinely too unequal, particularly after the big financial crash in 2008 and the build back from that, which favored banks and favored the better off and those who were at higher incomes, and savaged the middle and lower incomes globally, but also in the United States. And what we see now is that we need to think in different terms. And what is interesting to me, I have the advantage, as I'm chair of the elders that were brought together by Nelson Mandela in 2007. I succeed Kofi Annan, and before him, Archbishop Tutu. So it's a big challenge to fill those shoes. But anyway, what we're kind of conscious of is that we need to understand more fully that what really is important is that companies think afresh. And I'm lucky enough, as chair of the elders, to be linked to the B team of business leaders who are top CEOs with global companies basically, and they have opened up a really good conversation about getting away from just focusing on shareholder value to stakeholder value. And I'm sure some of your listeners are also like-minded. The importance of the stakeholder value, that you think of your employees, that you think of your community, that you think of the future of your technology in helping us with a sustainable world. You know, what will lead to that? And I'm really very keen to encourage this important movement by the private sector, and led, I must say, by the private sector, to really forge a new social contract and have an understanding that people need safety nets in their lives. And all of that language, all of that debate is very open at the moment, helped, I think, by the fact that COVID is like a mirror. It has exacerbated all of the previous inequalities and made us understand the intersectionality of those inequalities, which is a feminist idea, that they are very linked. So if you are poor and Black and a woman and Indigenous, you know, cumulatively, the problems are even more severe. But what I like about the private sector conversation is that it really is a conversation that understands our humanity better, and that actually we need to move forward in a way that has a renewed social contract where, yes, people are entitled to prosper and to make money, but that they should have much more concern, not just for the stakeholder, the Martin Friedman idea of, the business of business is profit.
Yeah. I wholeheartedly agree. And Larry Fink this morning, the CEO of the largest asset manager in the world, BlackRock, actually stated that we're moving into more of a stakeholder economy now. So yes, Milton Friedman's shareholder primacy is transitioning to now more of a stakeholder primacy, which obviously makes a lot more sense long term, because is the same issue we talked about, the inextricable connectedness of everything in the world. They're not siloed. You can't have economic growth. You can't have shareholder value increase in a socially destabilized, climate destabilized planet. So I agree with you on all of that. And we, as the private, we at FullCycle come at this from the private sector, but we all know that governments have a massive role to play. In fact, that MIT created a simulation tool that highlights the levers available in impacting climate change. And the simulation points to one of the biggest levers in decreasing temperatures is putting a price on carbon. So, I'd love your thoughts on what's going to take for governments worldwide to set a global price on carbon that finally shifts us away from carbon heavy industries to low carbon futures.
I've seen those models about the fact that it is a price on carbon that really shifts more quickly the move from our fossil fuel based economy to a clean energy. And I would add always now nature-based solutions as well. And, companies can also use carbon pricing in their own investment decisions. So that's a very good start. And this will reflect their overall cost to society. And also it will alert them to their own climate risk exposure. I was at the second meeting, I think it was, of the task force on climate-related financial disclosures, TCFD, in Japan, in Tokyo last November. It seems a long, long time ago, or maybe it was October. It seems a long, long time ago because we were physically there with Mark Carney. And he was promoting, obviously, climate risk disclosure as being very important. But he said publicly, and he said it to me privately, we sat beside each other at lunch, this must become mandatory. We must get a system where this becomes the way we do business, because this is how we're going to move the needle more quickly. And so I'm very supportive of that.
I was actually hoping that it was going to happen at COP25 in Glasgow.
Well,
Yeah.
COP26, yeah.
COP26, I apologize.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was sorry how that whole thing unfolded, but again,
But it's only postponed. I mean, we're still working towards COP26. Yeah, next year. Yeah.
Okay, we'll be there
Good.
eagerly, and we'll do our part from here to make sure that the attendees are in that mindset. Hopefully, we'll have more cooperative governments and to that idea.
Yeah, and I would go on from the carbon issue, which is really important. I think it's also very important to get as many investors and as many corporations as possible to commit to being zero carbon, hopefully zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 and work backwards. This is happening more and more. And that was the first commitment that the B team made. And they made it before the Paris Agreement. I was there with them in Davos when these companies decided to commit to be net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 and do it the climate justice way with just transition. And the just transition, as I'm sure many of your listeners will understand, but it's important, is that you don't neglect the workers who built the fossil fuel economy, that you provide a just transition. And if you look at the moment of what the European Union is doing, I'm following it quite closely, because for the first time, the European Union is giving a leadership that is quite significant. First of all, a recovery package of 750 billion, which is to address the poorer countries in Europe as well, you know, in a kind of important way. Germany and France have come together on this. They haven't quite decided yet exactly how it will be carved up, but anyway, it's agreed. And then they have the Green Deal with its significant fund for just transition. And then they have their biodiversity strategy. Now, if we can have a recovery in Europe that embraces all three, you know, a good recovery that's getting us out of the immediate issues and problem, which is very steep and deep, into a very significant move to green jobs and biodiversity protection, nature-based solutions. I think this would be very significant in leadership terms globally.
Yeah, I wish I can say the same about what's going on in our nation.
You're going to have an election.
Exactly. So, you know, and this is around my next question. So, you know, there seems to be a false narrative. I don't know if it's in the US only or around the world, and that somehow that voting for the greater good is voting against one's own self-interest. I disagree. You know, like we've seen in this pandemic that, you know, if one person contracts a virus halfway across the world, the whole world shelters in place. So we all know now more than ever that an equitable world, a world that works for everyone, is in everyone's self-interest. You know, do you think it's possible for us to retire the perception that in order to have winners, we have to have losers?
Yeah. Yeah, you know, I think it's an interesting question. I think it's perhaps a little bit more, because I've spent a lot of time in the United States, a little bit more the thinking there than necessarily, because we have more, you know, economies that have social welfare systems that are built in and have been for a long time, and we value our, you know, our concerns for, you know, those who become unemployed get unemployment benefit, maternity benefit, you know, those kinds of reliefs are built into the system. But what I hope COVID-19 has done in a kind of you know, a way that really brings home is our vulnerability as a human race. You know, this has hit us globally and very hard. Rich and poor, you know, and of course, obviously, for the poorer countries, it's even worse. For countries in Africa, you know, some of them, they don't have water to wash their hands, they don't have proper sanitation, you know, they don't have proper health systems. It can be even more serious. But what I feel is, it has made people think. And I come back to this collective behavior idea that I said was one of the lessons of COVID, that we can collectively decide to comply with good messaging and help to get us out of this COVID quicker. Now, when we get out of it, what is the good messages about climate? It's to be more careful consumers, to consume what will last. We have movements now of slow fashion. I've made a kind of commitment. I'm a jackets person. I have enough jackets to last me for the rest of my life. I'll just recycle them. I haven't changed size. I'll put them away for a few years and take them out. You know, it's things like that. And it's, I've become a pescatarian. I don't eat meat because I'm trying to message that we have to be thoughtful. Now, if we can be thoughtful as individuals and as consumers, it will make us more thoughtful as investors. It will make us more thoughtful as heads of corporations. You know, you bring it with you. And so I'm hoping that the very fact that we've understood, you know, how dramatically the air cleaned up when we stopped driving around as we were and having airplanes flying overhead. I mean, the air in Dublin became very sweet. We could hear the birds singing. We could still hear them singing. We're getting back now into opening up the economy, which we need to do. I'm saying we obviously have to do, but just, you know, to be more conscious of the nature-based solutions and the biodiversity solutions as we go forward. If I can do anything, it's to persuade your investors who I feel are geared more toward, well, they're geared to technical solutions. And in the biodiversity area, you can have huge, smart technical solutions. And I hope that's what they will be investing in.
They are, and consumers also in America, I see it, you know, they're a lot more aligning their values with their spending. This you know, blind addiction to consumerism is giving way to more conscious, thoughtful consumerism, and conversations like this help, and they are really propagating all over our economy. So it's great. There's a whole new set of brands that are that know that they will not exist unless they are responsible global citizens with the rest of us.
And one thing that really shocks me is we waste a third of the food in the world. That is utterly shocking. And yet there are people, you know, who are really hungry. And I understand there are people who are more hungry in the United States than they have been because of COVID. But to waste a third of the world's food, that is not the way we need it. And I think we're all more responsible than we like to admit for that. You know, here in Ireland, we still have too much plastic. We're learning, but we still don't recycle carefully enough. We still don't, you know, in particular, we need to get to this circular economy, and we need the good technology leads that some of your investors will be thinking about to help us there.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we focus on. That's the role that we decided to play in the equation, because we are this, you know, we are at FullCycle a group of long-term investors in technology, entrepreneurs that have come together really to identify those systemic technologies that can transform an entire system, because we understand climate change is not about plastic straws. It's about the things we don't see when we turn on the light or turn on the faucet or throw a wrapper away. You know, we want to turn all of that into a closed loop system, a carbon neutral or carbon negative system. And, you know, we want consumers obviously to be extremely aware of everything they do, but in case some of them are not, we still want their footprint to be neutralized through systemic technological change. And that's what we focus on accelerating worldwide, because we're cognizant of the fact that we have a very short window to do it in. So we don't just take equity stakes in companies, we designed an acceleration ecosystem to make sure that they become the ubiquitous form of dealing with modern human civilization. So, which again,
I like your sense of urgency. That's really good.
Oh yeah, I mean, I started FullCycle because of that sense of urgency, because I personally invested from the proceeds of my entrepreneurial activities in fantastic companies, you know, one of them being Tesla. And, you know, most people don't realize that, you know, as often as you see Teslas on the road in places like California, you know, Teslas after 17 years still only make up 0.25% of all cars on the road 17 years later. So we have to create, and this is a consumer product, let alone a industrial or municipal size technology. So we absolutely have to have an acceleration ecosystem, which is what FullCycle was designed to do, is to take technologies in that make the most sense and then accelerate their deployment worldwide. And which brings me to our next question to you, which is, the world we live in today is actually a direct result of the investment decisions that people who are on this call have made, or their ancestors have made 50 and 30 years ago. So how do we ensure that the investment community understands that the investment decisions we make today will result in the future 30 years from now and 50 years from now? And I say that really just so people can understand that the future isn't inevitable. It is the result of the decisions we make today. Can you speak to that a little bit so everybody can just realize how much power they hold in their hand and in their pocket?
Yes, and you know, it is incredibly important to have very thoughtful investment decisions now, starting with what I was saying earlier, that the investor makes that commitment to be zero carbon, zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, and works back to 2030. And maybe some people are already very much along this road, but everybody needs to be on that road. And then what are you investing in? Don't invest unless you are sure that the company you're investing in is also on that road. Check. Have they also made that commitment? And then, you know, it's a fulfilling, because companies need investors. You can influence the way a company by saying, look, I'm sorry, you don't seem to have made any clear commitment. I don't see, from where you see your future, that you're going in the right direction. You're still too dependent on coal in particular. That's not on. Even oil and gas, it has to be a transition. And it has to be a transition that's compatible with a 1.5 degree Celsius alignment.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to stop just on carbon neutrality, diversity. Like we put pressure on companies to make sure that they have gender representation in the ranks and on the board. People of color as well. These perspectives are very important. And I love what you said earlier about of course you're the chairwoman now of the elders, which is very representative of the world being run properly by women after men have been in charge for so long. And it reminded me of a friend of mine who has a t-shirt that I love. It says, try matriarchy.
Well, I am very glad that you have included, and I would also include, the importance of gender equality, diversity. I'm very enheartened actually by what I see of the Black Lives Matter and how strongly it is supported broadly in the United States, and I have to say right around the world. I mean, it really has taken off as an issue, and it's what I'm so keen that we would somehow think about, that we've had the time to reflect because of COVID with our families in a kind of lockdown, and rather uniquely a time to think about our humanity. And I cannot but ask people to remember the first article of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. That was in 1948. Why do we get it so wrong? That was Eleanor Roosevelt, the wife of an American president, who pushed that through the commission very strongly as chair of the commission. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights, dignity coming before rights. So that, if you're a poor person lying in a doorway, homeless and hungry, and people pass you by, how can you have dignity? So, I think we can come out of a COVID in a more thoughtful, reflective way. And we have a framework which was adopted by the UN system in a messy way, called the 2030 Agenda in 2015, before the Paris Agreement. And I wear the badge of it, as you've noticed on my lapel. The 2030 Agenda, with its 17 Sustainable Development Goals, is intended to be an agenda for all countries, not just for poorer countries to try and help them to come out of poverty, etc. No, it's for all countries, because no country is living sustainably with Mother Nature. So we all have to learn the kind of lessons. And between that Sustainable Development Goals, which has language about leaving no one behind, even prioritizing the furthest behind first. I've never heard that in any other UN document, but it's in the 2030 agenda with its 17 goals to give a broad-based approach. It talks about production and consumption. It talks about oceans. It talks about globally gender equality and equality between countries and within countries and so on. If we could get back to that kind of conversation about it, but what will help to drive the stakeholder approach and the approach of favoring gender equality and diversity is investment leadership. I'm convinced of that.
I'm so glad, and I agree with you very much so. Because we're getting a little bit shorter of time, maybe we can, Katie, if you've received some questions from some of the listeners, if you can share them here with former President Robinson, we can get those to her ASAP. So am I to read these questions? Okay, so here's the first question. We all know that we're in a race against time. Can you give context around why this US election in November is so critical in the global context of climate change?
Well, your current president, President Trump, has stated that he will pull the United States out of the Paris Agreement. Technically, he cannot do that until the 4th of November, 2020.
Oh, wow.
So that's the technical
Literally
reality.
The 4th. That's amazing.
4th of November. Yes, exactly. The day after the election, which means that if there is a change of president, it would be easy for the United States to have a different approach and hopefully stay, no, we want to be back in, or we want to stay in. And everybody understands that. Everybody in the climate world understands that. I think it is sad that under President Trump, the United States has undermined multilateralism. Multilateralism is how countries come together to solve global problems with global cooperation. That's what it is. And to undermine that is very sad. You know, to pull out of the Paris Climate Agreement, to now pull out of the World Health Organization, the Human Rights Council, to undermine the WTO and its judicial tribunal. These are all sad, sad, sad for the rest of the world. And it has diminished the power and authority of the United States. The United States is weaker at the moment than it has been in my lifetime, basically.
Yeah. Okay, I found the Q&A tab. So I'm going to read this one from Nancy Stevens. Hi, Nancy. It's a question about the B team. Are there concrete actions being taken now or just more talk? My young climate action activists are so tired of talk. What is
I think that's a very good question. And I'm actually not a businesswoman. So I'm a member of the B team as a moral conscience and force to precisely say, let's talk, what does it mean? What are you doing? And I am actually quite impressed. I'm quite impressed by the conversation I'm hearing, even in this actual COVID moment, where a number of these companies have realized that there's a pattern when things are really tough of companies laying off the lowest paid workers and keeping more of the management level. And actually that's unfair, because if you laid off a few of the management and kept more of the lower paid, they are the ones more exposed to falling into poverty and not being able to, to cope, basically. And a really thoughtful discussion. And I've sat in on a live discussion about this, and I have seen a number of the companies. Danone in France, the yogurt company, has committed to keeping all its employees, I don't know, until sometime next year, no matter what. You know, in other words, taking the hit as a company to save because we will come back. That's the point they're making. And also on gender and racial diversity, very strong commitments that are a change. I'm not in favor of talk either. I'm in favor of seeing concrete action. And also Natura, a Brazilian company in the terrible time in Brazil, is giving such example of being climate neutral already as a company and how it's going on. So, you know, there are really good examples that we can learn from.
Yeah, and let's reward these companies with our business. Let's take inventory of who's doing the right thing and reward them with our business, and withdraw our business for companies that are ruining the world for everyone. You know, because it's...
I certainly hope that none of your investors would be feeling that they have to invest in fossil fuel companies to come out of this. I mean, I think we need a transition. We don't need a total overnight disruption, because that's not good. And we need, as I said, a just transition for the workers. But, you know, it really is important to use the investment power, which it is, to move us all in the direction which we urgently, your word and your sentences on that, which I appreciated. This is urgent. The COVID-19 is an immediate health and economic and political and social stability crisis, but behind it, we still have the implacable climate crisis, which has not gone away.
Thank you. Here's the next audience question. Despite women being disproportionately affected by climate change, their crucial role in climate change adaptation and mitigation is being largely underutilized and under-resourced. There are multiple factors in place that prevent women from playing a full role in tackling climate change. How did the elders bring a gender perspective into your work on climate change?
I love that question.
Me too.
After my own heart. First of all, it's so true. Women are doing a huge amount. I actually wrote a book about climate justice. It's 11 stories. Thank you. 11 stories, 9 of them happen to be about women, but there are also 2 good men, and they're all about the work on building resilience, which grassroots women do, etc. But more than that, I was involved with my Foundation on Climate Justice in bringing together a group of women, a high-level ministerial network of women ministers on gender and climate to influence the process of the climate conferences, the UNFCCC process, because it lacked a gender base. And what we did was we used the fact that these were ministers, heads of delegations, so they could you know, influence a policy, and we got a gender action plan. But the second thing, which I think was equally important, was these women ministers determined who the delegates would be that would go to the climate conference. And they tended to be very technical to begin with, but we persuaded these ministers, you need to put in there grassroots women, young women, indigenous women, because their stories will make all the difference. And I literally can tell you it worked. It was quite impactful. When we had, because beforehand, if these women got to conferences, they were in the civil society zone, and none of the delegates ever went there practically. So there was no meeting of minds. But when they were delegates at the table and they started to speak, and they spoke about the reality of how climate was undermining their livelihoods and how they were trying to build resilience, it was so impactful. And that has continued. So I actually would hope, whether it's through investment or through foundations, that more money will go to grassroots women's groups. And the reason not enough money goes is because philanthropy often requires reporting back and paperwork. And I've met so many grassroots women who say, you know, I'm trying to get a grant. I can't even read the paperwork they've given me. It's so complicated that I don't know, I can't deal with that. Just believe in these women and give them the support that they deserve in building resilience in their communities, and you will always be rewarded. They will always excel anything you could have wanted, because I know them. I know over and over again how important it is that we support women on the ground who are doing for their communities the resilience building that's so needed.
Yeah, it's always interesting. Every time we look at studies of what happens when you put, you know, capital and opportunity in the hands of women, how the knock-on effects go far into the community, and the whole community thrives when that happens. So there's more of a systemic, holistic thinking that comes with that. And I'm so glad that question was asked. Thank you for whoever asked it. And thank you for your astute and important answer. Okay, next question. As the chair of the Elders Foundation, what are some of the key initiatives or NGOs that you or your colleagues are working on around mitigation that the audience should know about that give you hope for the future?
Thank you again for the question. If you go into the website of the Elders, which is just theelders.org, you'll see the areas where which we work on, but maybe I can mention one which seems relevant. We're very interested in promoting young people and their possibilities. The previous chair, whom I inherited the chair from, Kofi Annan, had a saying that I love. He would say constantly, "You are never too young to lead, and you are never too old to learn." So that's a good lesson for the elders, never too old to learn. I've learned a lot of new technical tricks to come on Zoom, etc. in recent times, but we have intergenerational conversations a lot. And on our blog, on our website, you'll see blogs of extraordinary young people who have contributed to their ideas at this time of COVID and climate. And you know, it's really very impressive and very moving. So that's one of the things we do. We work on universal healthcare. We work on climate issues, as I say. We work on justice issues. We've actually, there is a COVID-19 grassroots grassroots justice fund, which the elders are very anxious to support, which is giving legal advice which is needed to those in desperate straits and worsened by COVID, who need that advice and that access to justice. So there's a special COVID-19 grassroots justice fund, which the elders are very keen to see others supporting, and you would see information about it on our website. But we're not funders ourselves, and we are funded by some deep pockets who believe in what we're doing, and we're very grateful for that. So we're more keen to try to use our experience in a humble way and work for peace and human rights and speak out on issues that need to be spoken out about without fear or favor.
Well, you can count on FullCycle to make a donation to that NGO as well, because we want to support your work. And if it's this,
that would actually be very welcome at the moment, because it's specifically geared to COVID-19. It's being you know, very well managed. I can vouch for it, and you know, it would be really good. Yeah, I would be very happy. we
have no doubt, and it's, you know, it's this is who we are, and this is what we want to do. You know, as we come to a close, I really feel I need to say that I got so much more than I even hoped for, and I had a lot of expectations for this call. This has been extraordinary, former president. You know, my goal and our organization's goal was just to make sure that we emphasize what we've been saying all along, really through our entire professional careers as an organization, and you know, in our careers before we came together at FullCycle, is that everything is interconnected. You know, right now, the US economy alone is losing about $1 trillion a month in GDP growth. You know, there's the global, all governments in the world, between all the subsidies and all the assistance, has put up $9 trillion in loans and all kinds of other schemes to keep us afloat. Everything is connected. There is no, you know, there is no silo for economy, for health, for social justice, for climate change. Everything is inextricably connected, and we can't think of one without the other. So it's critical more than ever, if we're thinking about this from an economic perspective or a social justice perspective, to understand this very, very simple truth about the world we live in. We are in a closed sphere in space, and we live in a very specific chemical balance that, once disrupted, threatens everything on this planet. So it's not just the polar bears. Ultimately, it's us, our children, future generations, and you know, everything we've built over the last 12,000 years as a civilization. And I think you have made that very clear to everybody on this call. And with that said, I want to leave the last remarks to you. Thank you so much for joining us. This has really, really been an honor and very generous of you to take a whole hour of your time to visit with us and answer our questions.
Well, perhaps just in conclusion then, I should tell a story about being on a panel in New York, a social good panel with the first chair of the elders, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, a man I dearly love. He's retired now from the elders, but we're still in touch. I saw him fairly recently in South Africa. And we were on a panel in front of young people who were supposed to be on their iPads and their iPhones, etc., to create a social media buzz so that we would trend and all these. And when Archbishop Tutu is in front of a young audience, he tells them how much he loves them, how much he believes in them, how much faith he has in their abilities, etc. And it's all about love. And we were being moderated by an American journalist, and she got quite impatient with him and said quite sharply, "Archbishop Tutu, why are you such an optimist?" And he looked at her and he shook his head and he said, "Oh no, dearie," called her dearie, "oh no, dearie, I'm not an optimist. I'm a prisoner of hope." And I think there's a lot to be said in that. And the reason is, if you take a glass, I have a glass here of water. It's actually almost empty because I've been taking some water out of it. The glass doesn't have to be half full, but you have to work with what's there. You have to build the resilience with what's there. You have to have the energy of hope to do that. And the reason I say this is, you can describe the climate crisis, and I know you could, in such a devastating way that all the energy would go out of the room. People would just feel, oh, this is just so overwhelming, but it's not my problem. I'll just get on with my life and keep the head down, do what I can, and actually disengage. People disengage when they're so overwhelmed by the impossibility of it. Whereas if you're a prisoner of hope, you begin by saying, this is doable. I'm going to do what I can with it. It's not half full, but and I think, it's a really a space of energy and oxygen, and it's not optimism as such, but it is this will pass and we will get through it, and this has to be done and we will do it, and we will have a safe world for our children and grandchildren.
Amen. Okay, thank you everybody for taking an hour to visit with us today. Obviously, we've learned so much together, and for those of you who want to follow former President Robinson's work, please get her book, Climate Justice, and she's got a podcast called Mothers of Invention that I'm going to be listening to, and please go to theelders.org to learn more and to join us in donating to the organization that we just learned about. Thank you again, former President. It's really been an honor and a privilege to hear from you and visit with you.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Bye, everyone.
Thank
Till
you.
next time.